and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and tonight I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. I've been waiting for so long to read this one, about a month now, and that is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix is an auto-buy author for me. I love him so much. He's the type of author that kind of blends horror with comedy. I would think of him, myself personally, as kind of horror light, and the stories are just so good. And I think I might have a new favorite. This one is different for Grady. It's a little more serious. It's period piece. It takes place in 1970. And my goodness, it is beautiful, but also heartbreaking and difficult to read at parts. Anyway, what we have here is the story of a young girl named Fern. At least that's the name that is given to her by the owner of the home for wayward girls where she goes. She's 15 or 16 years old and she is pregnant. And her parents are like, you're going to go away and deal with this, and then when it's over, you can come back. And she's very, very upset about this. But she goes to Florida, which, my goodness, is sometimes a character all in itself in these horror books that are set there. Just the oppressive heat and all of that alone is such a scary character to me. Anyway, Fern's being driven to this home for girls in similar situations to herself. She feels very betrayed by her father. And anyway, he brings her there, and he is talking to the woman that runs this place while she's being given a tour by another girl. Her name's Rose. And she's like, don't leave without saying goodbye to me. Promise me you will say goodbye to me. And he promises, and then he leaves without saying goodbye to her. I made me so mad. Anyway, so the story is, before we get into any kind of spoilers, so I will give you a warning, but basically this is the story of a group of girls living in a home where they are basically being primed to give these babies up for adoption. Like, what they eat is monitored at all times. Like, they can't have too much salt. Like, they want these babies as perfect as possible. And then the goal is to adopt these babies out into the world. And meanwhile, while these girls are in the home, there's this librarian that visits every 2 weeks in this mobile library. And she comes for the first time since Fern has been there. So the thing about the girls' names is the woman that runs it, Miss Wellwood, she gives all of the girls a name that's a flower or a plant, like some sort of thing like that. And she wants them not telling each other their real names, not sharing their backstories, nothing like that, because it's, to be as anonymous as possible, because the goal is to leave the home, the baby gets adopted, and the girl goes back to try and live as normal of a life as she can. So, her dad leaves, and then she's just kind of, the bookmobile, or the mobile library. So the four girls, there's Rose and Fern, and then Holly and Zinnia, which we'll get more into them in a bit, but they're the four girls that are kind of sticking together. And they go to the mobile library together because they know that Zinnia and Fern love to read. So they're like, listen, if we all pick a book that's really good, and then we can all sort of pass it around and read it. So they do that, and then the other girls leave, but then Fern's left on the bus, and the librarian is like, I got just the book for you. And she pulls out this book. It's called How to Be a Groovy Witch, because it's 1970. And she gives it to her, and she's like, you take a look at that for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll see what you think about it. And so from there, Fern goes on an adventure, learning about this book and witchcraft because they learned that the librarian, her name is Miss Parsi, and she's a witch, and she's sort of trying to get the girls to come to her because she's getting older and she kind of needs someone to replace her in a certain kind of way. And it's a beautiful story. It's a story about motherhood and family and friendship and what it means to be a mother, and it's about sacrifice, and it's also political commentary on Roe versus Wade in the United States at its heart. It's even mentioned at the end where one of the characters is like, this could have all been avoided if it had happened a few years later, because these girls were, well, we won't get into it until we get into this book. Anyway, it's so good. It's fantastic. Grady never misses. Never. Not for me. I love him so much. What can I say? So that's, if you don't want any spoilers, now's the time to flip away. What I will say, though, if you are staying for the spoilers, is, wow, what we have here is a bunch of girls between the ages of like 14 and 18, and they go through so much trauma. So much trauma. And one of the girls, so like I was saying, there's Rose and Fern and Holly and Xenia. They're kind of the main group that we follow. So Fern, as we saw, she got brought here by her dad. Rose has been here the longest. She's like this gorgeous, hippie, just really beautiful girl. And she's really like, fighting the patriarchy, against all the wars, things like that. And I just loved her so much. And then there's Holly. She's this little tiny girl. She just turned 14, and she's been knocked up by the pastor at her church, who is the person who's wanting to adopt the baby once she gives birth to it. And it's like, that can't happen. And that's kind of what all three girls decide, along with Holly, like, that can't happen. Holly cannot be sent home because her parents have kind of pawned her off to this pastor because they have so many kids, they don't know what to do. And he took a special shine to her, and boy, did he. So, yeah, and these girls, they began to practice with the book that they got from Miss Parsi, and they have success. They have success at first, and because one of the girls, Xenia, she has a terrible morning sickness, but it's not morning sickness, it's all day long sickness. She is so sick, and they use one of the spells, and they're able to transfer it to somebody else. So they transfer it to the doctor in the home, who had said to Xenia, like, it's all in your head. If you decide you want to feel better, you'll feel better. So she transfers it to him, and boy, does he not feel well. And then they're sort of playing around with more spells. When it's starting to get more complicated, Miss Parsi kind of appears one night, and she's telling them, in order for them to be able to move on, because as Fern, once they got past that first spell, as Fern's flipping through the book, she's like, I can't even read this, I don't understand what it says. So Miss Parsi's like, well, when you decide you're ready to join me, you can sign my little book here in blood with your thumbprint, and you'll be sort of pledging fealty and loyalty and obedience to me, and then you'll be able to read the book for sure. For sure. So the girls do it because they're all kind of singularly focused on saving Holly. Like, they've all got their own things they want to do and whatnot, but Holly is at the front of all of their minds because they love her so much, and she's just a sweet little thing who's been abused for so many years by this pastor. So she starts coming to them more, and then Fern, eventually she flat out tells Fern, like, I need you because I'm getting old and I'm dying, and I need to transfer my, like, witch consciousness into your mind. And she's like, no thanks, not interested. And then the witch is like, well, it's too late, girl, you already signed, you put the thumbprint on there. And Fern's like, I don't care. I'm not doing that. So becomes this, this tug, this pull and tug from Fern and this witch. Eventually Rose has her baby. It's horrific because Rose had wanted to keep her baby. She was gonna get a farm and like have this life with this little girl that she had already named Blossom, and they took the baby from her, right from her arms. And then Fern had originally not wanted the baby, but then she started to change her mind. Like, the more she'd hear Rose talk about what she had wanted to do with her baby, the more she was like, well, maybe I could too. Like, maybe we could be moms. And then Fern's going back and forth when it's her time in the hospital, and it gets so sad because at one point she wants to hold her baby, and the nurse at first doesn't want to let her, but eventually she does. And it's just this whole sad situation. Fern has been, like, delivery was so rough for her. She had to get stitched. It was a whole thing. And it's like, eventually she does sign the baby over to the adoptive parents that are there to get it. But she feels so hurt and so alone and so jaded. Like, this experience has taken every ounce of innocence that was left inside of her spirit and sucked it out. By the time she gets back to the home, and like Zinnia and Holly are like plotting out their plan to help Holly, like, Fern's so disillusioned. She's like, what's the point? It's not gonna work. She's like, she's lost all of her hope. And yeah, then it becomes this whole thing where like Miss Percy wants her so bad. Oh, and eventually one night the girls are out in the woods and they meet like the whole coven that Miss Percy like keeps company with. And they're all really nice girls. And there's one woman, she's so old, and she's really out of it, and she's always like saying weird things, and like, so Fern eventually finds out that what Miss Percy wants to do to her, to like input her lineage and her spirit into Fern, that happened to this older woman whose name is Megs, but she wouldn't go willingly, and so they forced their way into her mind, and that's why she's kind of raving and like really off-putting now. And so Miss Percy's like, if you don't submit, that's going to be you, because I'm coming in whether you like it or not. So eventually she learns that like Miss Percy is sick. Like, she doesn't have long earthside. She's got liver cancer, and it's just something that her and her coven have never been able to work through and like learn to heal. So she's getting like extra intense about it. And so there's a woman who works in the home. Her name is Hagar. And she's like, because at first when I started reading the book, I was like, okay, Miss Percy, you're going to be like the badass witch in this story. Wrong. Like, she's bad. The badass witch in this story is Hagar, the help in the home. Because as time goes by, like, they do a spell for Miss Wellwood, like the person in charge of the home, and she has this huge thing happen to her because the spell that was done from Rose to her was, I want them to feel how I felt. And so Miss Wellwood is instantly in agony. So Hagar goes and checks on her in a couple days, and she looks 9 months pregnant, and she's like 60 years old, and Hagar's like, what is happening here? What is happening here? And then Hagar's like, okay, because she has experience delivering babies, so she's like, let's deliver this baby. And it turns out to be a bucket full of eels. So like, that was the spell that like Rose and Fern and Holly put on her. So Hagar goes back to the house. She pulls aside Fern and Zinnia and Holly, because Rose at this point is gone. She is like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you better stop it. You better stop it. You don't know what you're playing around with here. Stop. And so from there, like, things keep happening when the witches come. One night they look out, the witches are like hanging in the trees, like sitting on the branches, staring in the house, very creepy. And then like one night it just starts raining rocks over their house, and like a lot of the girls are outside and they get very injured. Like these are young teenage pregnant girls, and they get so injured by the rocks. So yeah, and from there it's just like her getting ready to defeat this and doing whatever it takes to save Holly. Because one night they see the Reverend comes. He wants to see Holly one last time before the baby comes, because he's obsessed with little girls. And that kind of jogs Fern back into it, and she's like, okay, we have to help Holly. And so they do. When the time comes, some of the girls create a distraction inside so Zinnia and Fern can get Holly into the cab without the nurse. So the nurse goes back and she's like, you guys get in the car, I'm gonna go see what's going on in here, and I'll be back. But then they're like, oh, you can go on, we've got the taxi vouchers. And then they try to tell them they've got to stop at Hagar's house because she's coming to the hospital with them. But the real truth is they want to stop at Hagar's house so she can deliver Holly's baby, because they don't want Holly anywhere near a hospital, because they fear that they will take her baby immediately, and then the baby will get sent home with the Reverend, and then eventually Holly will also get sent home with the Reverend. So after that, the next day, Hagar's like, you guys gotta go. Like, we can't risk our jobs, because it's her and her sister Miriam. She's like, we're not risking our jobs for you. We helped you. You're good. Go. So she tells them the name of a woman who will help her for a few days until she's well enough to travel. But the interesting thing, too, that I really liked is, like, Holly's experience having a home birth with a midwife was so, like, it was tough, but it was like there was no tearing, there was no trauma. Whereas all the girls who had the births in the hospital, they went through traumatic experiences. So I thought that was very interesting how that was portrayed in this book. And then there's like a standoff at the end where Miss Percy is here with her coven, and she's gonna take Fern and she's gonna kill this one and do this. And the rest of the coven are kind of like, are you okay? Like, we don't need to do this, because Fern does not want to go with them. Holly desperately does. She sees a way for her and her baby to be safe. These women, they live in the woods, you know, like, Holly's like, I could be safe with you, and I can learn, and I can help. And Percy's like, no, well, we want Fern. But the other girl's like, stop, you're old, you're sick. This girl wants to come with us. We want people who want to come with us. And they're so excited for Holly, and Holly goes with them. And then after that, there's a bit of a kerfuffle. But then after Fern's dad comes and picks her up and drives her home. And there was this sweet part where because of course he left her without saying goodbye 3 months ago when he left. And as they're driving home, she looks at him and she has a bit of a different understanding for him. And she's like, he's just scared. He was scared, I was scared, but he was also scared. And you know, everyone's just kind of trying to do the best they can. Then we get a bit of a flash forward, 54 years to be exact. And we get a look at Rose and Fern and Holly and Zinnia now. We learn that Rose eventually found her daughter when her daughter was like 20 years old. Rose went and found her, and they live on that farm, you know. And it's Rose and Rose's daughter Blossom, and then Blossom's daughter, and it's beautiful, and we get to see them. And then we learn that Zinnia, you know, she's a lawyer, she's married to an artist, and they had other kids, but one day she tried to reach out to her adopted baby, but the baby was not interested, or it was a man at that point, it was a grown-up. He was not interested in having a conversation with her or any sort of relationship. And she understood it, even though it hurt her heart, she understood it. So now it's Fern's turn. And originally, thanks to Holly doing some little magic, the baby reaches out to Fern. And it takes Fern a while to call her back, but eventually she does. And they have this beautiful conversation where at first she's like, it's me, I'm your mother. And then the child says, the one who gave me away. And she's like, no, I did not give you away, you were taken away. And then they both cry, and then it's this beautiful, like, you know, there's space for each other in each other's lives. And it's really beautiful. And it's a letter to her adopted child who's now 54. And, her child says, it's okay, like, don't cry, like, I get it, you were a little girl. And then in the book at the end, from Fern's, Fern says, we weren't just little girls, we were witches. And it was a beautiful, sad story. It's definitely less horror than Grady's other ones, but there are some, like, elements, but don't let that stop you. This is also, in its own right, a historical fiction, with just what I would assume would be, in keeping with the witchcraft of it all, things that are kind of hard to avoid. Those type of creepy things. And Grady, I'm sure you're not watching this, but I love you so much. And tonight I actually went over to my best friend Chris's house, and we recorded an episode of our podcast, THC Library, on this book. So that's going to be up on Spotify on Monday. So if you want to listen to us talk about it instead of just me talking about it, you can do that on Monday. Anyway, thank you so much, as always, for watching, and I will see you again real soon. Bye.